The machines beeped in steady rhythm, marking time like a metronome counting down to silence. Ethan Blackwood lay in the hospital bed, his weathered hands folded across a chest that had once been broad as a barn door. 74 years had carved deep lines into his face, each one a story of sun and wind, of loss and survival. The doctor had been clear. 3 to 6 months. Maybe less if the winter came hard. The door opened. James walked in, and Ethan saw himself 40 years younger. Same jaw, same walk, same shoulders that carried weight they shouldn't have to bear. But James's eyes held something Ethan remembered from his own mirror in darker days. Defeat. "Hey, Dad." James pulled a chair close, the legs scraping against linoleum. His voice was hollow. Ethan studied his son. The tie hung loose, the shirt wrinkled. The wedding ring was gone, leaving a pale band of skin that looked raw and recent. "You look like hell," Ethan said. James laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Thanks, Dad. You always know what to say." Silence settled between them, thick as Montana snow. Through the window, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent. Ethan had lived his whole life in their shadow. Soon he would rest in their shadow too. "I lost them," James's voice cracked. "Sarah got full custody. The judge said I'm an unfit father, said I prioritize work over family, said I'm emotionally unavailable." He looked at his hands. Maybe he's right. Ethan closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was looking at a younger man drowning in shame, and it hurt worse than the failing heart in his chest. "Do you know why I named you James?" "After Grandpa," James said automatically. "After Captain James Thornton. He died at Little Bighorn when I was 12. Never met him, but my father served under him in the cavalry. Dad said Captain Thornton taught him one thing before he died. A man isn't measured by what he says. He's measured by what he builds." James looked up. "What does that have to do with me losing my kids?" "Everything." Ethan shifted in the bed, wincing. "Let me tell you about my grandfather, Ethan Blackwood. The year 1884. The year he turned 34. The year he had nothing. The year he met your great-great-grandmother, Clara." "Dad, I know the story. You put an ad in the paper. Grandma came from Boston. You fell in love. You know the story white people tell at weddings," Ethan said. "You don't know the truth." He reached for the water cup and James helped him drink. "The truth is harder, and that's what you need to hear right now." James settled back. Outside, a siren wailed past. Inside, an old man prepared to excavate his past, hoping his son might find something worth salvaging in the ruins. "Close that door," Ethan said. "This is going to take a while." The door clicked shut. The machines kept beeping, and Ethan Blackwood began to speak. October 1884. Montana Territory. The law office of Harrison Miller smelled like old paper and older tobacco. Ethan sat in a wooden chair that creaked under his weight, staring at words that felt like a noose tightening. Foreclosure notice. The letters were printed in black ink that seemed to bleed across the page. First Montana Bank. Amount due, $850. Payment deadline, December 15th, 1884. "They can't do this." Ethan's voice was flat. He had learned in the war not to show emotion when the bullets started flying. This felt like bullets. Harrison Miller leaned back in his chair. He was 50, balding, with eyes that had seen too many men lose everything to paperwork and patience. "They can, Ethan. You signed the note 3 years ago. The terms were clear. The winter of 883 killed 40% of my herd." Ethan set the paper down carefully as if it might explode. Nobody could have predicted that storm. Banks don't care about acts of God. They care about payment schedules. Miller pulled out another document. "Under the Homestead Act of 1862, you have certain protections, but only if you meet the requirements. You've been on that land 7 years. You've made improvements. But," he hesitated, "but what? The Montana Territory has a provision. Married men with families get priority consideration in foreclosure disputes. The theory is that a family homestead deserves more protection than a bachelor's claim." Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. "I'm not married." "Exactly." Miller tapped the document. "If you were, I could argue this is a family homestead, and I could buy you time, maybe force a better payment plan. As it stands," he shrugged. The room fell silent except for the ticking of a clock on the wall. Each tick felt like another shovel of dirt on a grave. There's something else. Miller pulled out a third paper. I didn't want to mention this unless you asked, but given the circumstances, he slid it across the desk. Ethan read. His jaw tightened. The letterhead said Northern Pacific Railway Company. The text was dense with legal language, but the meaning was clear. They wanted to survey his land for a potential rail line. They mentioned something called eminent domain. They talked about fair compensation determined by a court-appointed assessor. They want my land. Not just want, they can take it. If the government decides a railroad serves the public interest, they can force you to sell. The question is the price. Miller leaned forward. I've done some research. Judge Theodore Moss will handle any eminent domain case in this district, and Judge Moss owns 500 shares of Northern Pacific Railway stock. That's a conflict of interest. It's corruption, Miller said bluntly. But proving it is different from knowing it. If your foreclosure goes through, the bank sells your land at auction. Northern Pacific buys it cheap. The railroad goes through. Everyone profits except you. Ethan stood. He walked to the window. Outside, Birch Creek moved through its autumn day. Horses tied to hitching posts. Women with shopping baskets. Men loading wagons. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that the world could be pulled out from under you with nothing more than ink and paper. What would you do? Ethan asked. Miller was quiet for a long moment. If it were me, I'd find a wife. Fast. I'd make that ranch a family homestead. And I'd prepare to fight like hell in court. The Lucky Horseshoe Saloon sat on the edge of Birch Creek like a man trying to decide whether to step into the mud or stay on solid ground. It was the kind of place where ranchers went to forget and drifters went to hide. Ethan pushed through the doors just as the sun started its descent behind the mountains. Captain Owen Harding stood behind the bar, polishing a glass that would never be clean, no matter how much he polished. He was 58 with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen the elephant, as the old soldier said. He had commanded a cavalry unit during the Indian Wars. Now he commanded a bar and offered wisdom to men young enough to be his sons. You look like a man who just got kicked by his own horse, Owen said. Ethan sat on a stool. Worse, I got kicked by the bank and the railroad at the same time. Owen poured whiskey without asking. Tell me. Ethan did. He laid out the foreclosure, the railroad, the judge, the timeline. Owen listened the way good officers listen, without interrupting, processing information, like a general studying a map. When Ethan finished, Owen set down his glass. You need a wife. That's what Miller said. Miller's smart. Listen to him. Owen refilled both glasses. Montana Territory law favors married homesteaders. It's not just about sentiment, it's about stability. The territory wants families putting down roots, not drifters passing through. You get married, you're not just one man trying to hold land. You're the foundation of a family. The law sees that differently. I don't have time to court anyone. It's October. The foreclosure is December 15th. You don't court. Owen reached under the bar and pulled out a newspaper. The Helena Weekly Herald. He flipped to a page near the back. You advertise. The section was titled Matrimonial Advertisements. Ethan had seen them before but never paid attention. Now he read them with the focus of a man studying a battle plan. Widow 38 seeks honest man for companionship in partnership. Farmer 45 looking for woman of good character to share homestead life. Young woman 22 desires correspondence with gentleman of means. Mail order brides, Ethan said. Well, practical marriages, Owen corrected. This isn't Boston society, son. This is the frontier. People do what they have to do to survive. You need a wife. There are women back east who need a fresh start. It's not romance, it's partnership. Ethan stared at the advertisements. Something about the transaction felt wrong. Buying a wife through the mail like ordering tools from a catalog. But then again, what choice did he have? The alternative was losing everything his family had built. If I do this, Ethan said slowly, what do I even say? Owen pushed a piece of paper and a pencil across the bar. The truth. Women who answer these ads aren't looking for fairy tales. They're looking for honesty. Give them that. Ethan picked up the pencil. His hand, which could rope a steer or fix a fence line without trembling, shook slightly over the blank page. He thought about his mother dead 5 years. He thought about his brother dead 3 years. He thought about 7 winters alone in a cabin that felt smaller every year. He began to write. Rancher 34 seeks practical woman, 320 acres grazing land, honest work, no pretense. Montana territory harsh but free, room for children. Write to E. Blackwood, Birch Creek Station. He read it over. It sounded cold, transactional. He almost crumpled it up. Then he thought about the foreclosure notice and forced himself to slide the paper across to Owen. Owen read it and nodded. Good, direct, no false promises. The women who answer will know what they're getting into. Or they'll think I'm a desperate fool. You are a desperate fool, but so is every man who ever tried to carve a life out of this territory. Owen folded the paper carefully. I'll take this to the Herald office tomorrow. They'll run it next week. Then you wait. Ethan paid for the whiskey and walked out into the October twilight. The mountains stood black against a purple sky. Stars were beginning to appear cold and distant. Somewhere back east, a woman might read his advertisement, might consider trading her old life for a new one, might be desperate enough or brave enough or crazy enough to answer. He didn't let himself hope. Hope was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. 3 weeks later, the letters arrived. The postmaster, a thin man named Cyrus with spectacles that magnified his eyes to owl size, handed Ethan 3 envelopes with poorly concealed curiosity. Popular fellow, Cyrus said. Ethan took the letters without comment and walked to the general store where he sat on the bench outside and opened them one by one. The first letter was written in delicate script on pink stationery. The woman described herself as 29 from Philadelphia, with refined tastes and a delicate constitution. She wrote about her need for a gentle life, a beautiful home, perhaps near a city where culture could be found. She asked if his ranch was near any opera houses. Ethan folded the letter and set it aside. Montana territory had many things. Opera houses were not among them. The second letter was the opposite. Stark, businesslike. The woman was 43, a widow, no children. She listed her skills like items on an invoice: cooking, cleaning, sewing, basic veterinary care. She asked about wages, living arrangements, and whether the position included separate quarters. She never once mentioned marriage. Ethan set that letter aside too. He didn't need an employee. He needed a partner. The third letter made him stop. It was written on plain paper in clear, strong handwriting. No flourishes. No wasted words. Mr. Blackwood, I am Clara Whitmore, 26 years old, of Boston, Massachusetts. My father was Dr. Robert Whitmore, a veterinarian who specialized in equine medicine. He died in 1883. The farm was sold to pay his debts. I went to live with my aunt, who wished me to marry a man I could not respect. I refused. She told me to find my own way. So I am finding it. I grew up among horses. I know foaling, illness, injury, and training. My father taught me to shoot a Winchester because he worried about my safety when he traveled. I can work dawn to dark. I do not fear hardship. I am not seeking romance or pretty words. I am seeking partnership. Honest work in a place where my past does not follow me. If this aligns with your needs, I am willing to make the journey. Respectfully, Clara Whitmore. Ethan read the letter 3 times. The part about the Winchester caught his attention. A woman who could shoot wasn't common. A woman who admitted it was even rarer. The part about partnership, not romance, settled something in his chest. She understood what this was. He went back to the post office. I need to send a letter to Boston, he told Cyrus. Fast or regular? Fast. He wrote at the counter, standing up using Cyrus's spare paper. Miss Whitmore, your letter received. I need honest work and honest partnership. Montana is not Boston. Winters are brutal. The land is hard, but it is free in ways cities are not. I am sending $60, $50 for train fare from Boston to Helena, $10 for supplies. If you come, we will see if this arrangement suits us both. If it does not, I will provide return fare. No promises except truth, E. Blackwood. He folded the money into the letter and sealed it. Cyrus weighed it, calculated postage, and took Ethan's coins. She must be something special, Cyrus said. I don't know what she is yet, Ethan replied. He walked out into November cold and tried not to count the days. 8 weeks of waiting felt like 8 years. Ethan worked the ranch from dawn until his hands bled. He repaired fence line that didn't need repairing. He reorganized the barn twice. He cleaned the cabin until even his mother's ghost would have approved. Anything to keep his mind from wondering whether Clara Whitmore would actually come or whether she would take his $60 and disappear into Boston's crowds. Then on a gray afternoon in late November, when the sky threatened snow, a telegram arrived. Arriving Birch Creek, November 18th. Stop, Clara Whitmore, stop. November 18th was 3 days away. Ethan stood at the station platform on the appointed day wearing his only suit. It was 8 years old, bought for his brother's funeral. It smelled like cedar from the trunk where it had been stored. His hat was in his hands. His heart was in his throat. The stage was late. He waited as the sun moved across the sky. Waited as other people came and went. Waited as doubts multiplied like rabbits. She had changed her mind. The stage had crashed. She had seen Montana through the window and told the driver to turn around. Then he heard it. The distant thunder of wheels and hooves. The stage rounded the bend, trailing dust that hung in the cold air like fog. The driver pulled the horses to a stop with professional ease. Two men climbed down from the top. Passengers began to emerge. A merchant Ethan recognized. A family heading to Helena. An old woman who looked like she had been riding for a month. Then Clara appeared in the doorway of the stage. Ethan forgot to breathe. She was tall. Not freakishly so, but tall enough that her eyes met his almost level when she stepped down. Auburn hair was pulled back under a simple bonnet. Her face was elegant in a way that had nothing to do with paint or powder. High cheekbones, strong jaw, eyes the color of spring grass, clear and assessing. She wore a navy traveling dress, practical and well-worn. No lace, no ribbons. Her hands, which gripped a carpet bag, were bare. He could see calluses on her palms. But what stopped his heart was something else. She carried herself like a woman who had walked through fire and decided she would not burn again. There was steel in her spine and stone in her gaze. This woman was supposed to be a practical ranch wife. She looked like she belonged in a Boston drawing room, not on a frontier platform covered in mud and horse droppings. Ethan's stomach dropped. A mistake had been made. This couldn't be his bride. But she walked straight to him. Carpetbag swinging, chin lifted against the wind that tried to steal her bonnet. "You must be Ethan," she said. Her voice was clear, educated. Boston refined but not soft. There was iron underneath the polish. Ethan remembered his manners and pulled off his hat. "Yes, ma'am, I'm Ethan Blackwood." "Clara Whitmore." She set down her bag and extended her hand like a man would. He shook it. Her grip was firm. He could feel the calluses, proof that her letter hadn't lied about work. "Miss Whitmore, I think there might be some confusion." Ethan chose his words carefully. "I wasn't expecting someone quite so." He trailed off, unable to find words that wouldn't sound insulting. "You weren't expecting me," Clara said. "Not offended, just stating fact. You expected someone plainer, older, someone who looks like the frontier already claimed her." Ethan swallowed hard. "I didn't mean any insult." "I understand." Clara looked past him at the wagon, the mountains beyond, the vast emptiness that was Montana territory. "But I am who I said I was in my letters. I can work. I will work. And I did not come all this way to turn around because you're surprised." There was something in her words that made Ethan look at her differently. Not pride or vanity, determination. Like she was running from something worse than Montana winter. Before Ethan could respond, the stage driver began unloading luggage. A trunk thudded to the ground. Then something else appeared in the doorway of the stage. A boy. He was 12, maybe 13. Thin as a fence post. Clothes that had been through too many wearings. Hair the color of straw, eyes like a deer that had heard wolves and bums. He climbed down slowly, favoring one leg. Clara immediately moved to help him. Her hand on his shoulder was gentle but proprietary. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "this is Thomas Reed. I found him on the train from Chicago. His parents died of fever 3 days into the journey. No one else would take responsibility for him. I could not leave him." Ethan stared at the boy, then at Clara, then back at the boy. This was not part of the arrangement. He had agreed to a wife. Now he was getting a wife and a child. The smart thing would be to protest, to explain that he couldn't afford to feed an extra mouth, to send the boy to an orphanage in Helena. But Ethan looked at Thomas's eyes, saw the fear there mixed with desperate hope, and remembered being 12 years old and terrified after his father came back from the war, different than when he left. "Have you eaten?" Ethan asked the boy. Thomas shook his head. Are you hungry? A nod. Ethan turned to Clara. The ranch is 30 miles from here. We'll stop at the general store, get supplies, get the boy some food. Clara's shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Ethan said. He looked at Thomas. Can you work? Yes, sir, Thomas whispered. You know anything about horses? A little, sir. Don't call me sir. Makes me feel old. Ethan picked up Clara's trunk and carried it to the wagon. Name's Ethan. You work for your keep, you earn respect. That's the deal. Thomas's eyes went wide. Yes, Ethan. People were watching from the platform. Ethan could feel their eyes. Mrs. Harris from the general store stood with her arms crossed, face pinched in judgment. She leaned to whisper to the woman beside her, and both of them looked at Clara like she was a puzzle that didn't fit. Ethan ignored them. He loaded the trunk, then helped Clara into the wagon seat. Thomas climbed into the back, settling among bags and boxes. As they pulled away from the station, Ethan heard Mrs. Harris's voice carry on the wind. She's too pretty. She'll run back to Boston within a month. Mark my words. Clara heard it too. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She just looked ahead at the road that led into the wilderness, into uncertainty, into whatever life she had chosen over the one she'd left behind. They rode in silence for the first mile. The wagon creaked. The horses' hooves struck frozen ground in steady rhythm. Behind them, Thomas sat quiet as a mouse afraid to disturb whatever fragile peace existed between the two adults up front. Finally, Ethan spoke. The ranch is called Blackwood, 320 acres along Pine Creek. The cabin is small, 2 bedrooms and a main room that serves as kitchen and living space. The work is hard. Winter here is not like Boston winter. I don't need luxury, Clara said. I need honest work and a clean start. Ethan glanced at her. Why leave Boston early? Clara's hands tightened on her carpetbag. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice carefully controlled. My father died owing money. A lot of money. The farm was sold, but it wasn't enough. The debt passed to my aunt. A judge offered to forgive it if I married his son, Charles Rutherford. She paused. Charles was a drunk. I saw him hit a servant girl, left bruises on her arms. When I refused to marry him, my aunt was furious. She said I was selfish, ungrateful. She told me if I wouldn't marry Charles, I could find my own way in the world. So you chose this? I chose freedom over safety. Clara looked at him directly. Your letter was honest. That mattered more than anything else. They crested a rise and Blackwood Ranch came into view. The cabin sat near a creek that caught the afternoon light and threw it back like scattered silver. Behind it, a barn weathered gray by time and wind. Corrals spread out in geometric patterns. Cattle dotted the landscape like punctuation marks on a page of brown grass. It wasn't much. Ethan knew that. Compared to Boston estates or even proper ranches farther south, it was small and rough. But it was his. Built with his father's hands and his own. Watered with sweat and sometimes blood. It's beautiful, Clara said softly. Ethan almost laughed. No one had ever called his ranch beautiful. Functional, maybe. Adequate. But beautiful, you really think so? Yes. Clara pointed to the creek. Water year-round. Never goes dry, even in August. And that's your barn. Built it with my brother before he died. Clara nodded slowly, taking it all in like she was memorizing a map. This will do nicely. In the back of the wagon, Thomas peered over the side, eyes wide. He had never seen anything like this. All that space, all that sky coming from crowded trains and cramped cities, the sheer vastness of Montana must have felt like stepping onto another planet. Ethan pulled the wagon up to the barn, the familiar smells of hay and horses wrapped around them. He lit a lantern and led them inside. In the far stall, a chestnut mare stood heavy with foals, shifting her weight with obvious discomfort. Her name was Willow, and she had been his mother's favorite horse before the fever took her. Clara moved toward the stall immediately, all hesitation gone. She approached Willow the way people who truly understand animals approach them. Slowly, confidently. Speaking in low tones Ethan couldn't quite hear. Willow's ears flicked toward Clara. The mare didn't flinch when Clara's hands moved along her swollen belly, reading the shape beneath the skin like braille. She's close, Clara said, her voice sharp with focus now. Professional. Very close. You may have less than 2 days. How can you tell? Clara met his eyes. I grew up on a horse farm, Mr. Blackwood. I've helped with more foalings than I can count. Her udder is full. Her muscles are soft here. She indicated the mare's hindquarters. And feel this. She took Ethan's hand and placed it on Willow's belly. Beneath his palm, Ethan felt movement, strong kicks, but something else too. Something Clara had detected that his less educated hands couldn't identify. The foal is positioned wrong, Clara said quietly. One leg is back. If she goes into labor like this, we could lose them both. Ethan felt his blood go cold. Willow was the last piece of his mother he had left. Can you fix it? Clara's eyes held his. In their green depths, he saw both confidence and fear. I have to, but I'll need your help, and I'll need you to trust me completely. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the barn boards. Inside, Ethan Blackwood stood beside a woman he had known for 3 hours and made a decision that would change everything. I trust you, he said. Clara nodded once. Then she rolled up her sleeves and got to work preparing for a battle only she knew how to fight. That night, long after the lamps were low and the cabin had settled into uneasy quiet, a scream tore through the darkness. Not a human scream, a horse in mortal distress. Ethan shot upright in his bedroll by the fire. He had given Clara the bedroom, Thomas the small room that had been his brother's. He grabbed his boots and was halfway out the door before his mind fully woke. Clara's bedroom door stood open. She was already gone. Ethan ran through frozen grass that crunched beneath his feet. The barn glowed with lamplight. Inside, he found Clara in Willow's stall, still in her nightgown, but wearing Ethan's spare coat. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows. Her face held the controlled urgency of a general watching battle lines break. She's been straining, Clara said without looking up. Something's wrong. Willow lay on her side in the straw legs, kicking, eyes rolling white with fear. Every sound she made cut through Ethan like a knife. Clara turned her head just enough to meet his stare. We need more light. Right now. Ethan moved. He hung lanterns fast, one after another, until the barn glowed bright and shaky with overlapping circles of light. Thomas appeared in the doorway, face pale, eyes huge. Stay back, Ethan ordered. Then softer, but stay ready. We might need you. Clara scrubbed her hands and arms with soap and water, so cold it made Ethan's teeth ache just watching. Then she knelt beside Willow and pressed her hands to the mare's belly with the focused intensity of a doctor reading a patient's pulse. Hold her head, Clara said. Talk to her. Keep her calm. Ethan dropped to his knees by Willow's neck. He stroked her face with one hand while the other gripped the halter. He whispered the same soft words he had used on scared horses during the war. Words that meant nothing and everything. Steady now, easy girl. I'm here. You're not alone. Willow's ear flicked toward him. For just a moment, her eye found his, and he saw trust there mixed with terror. Clara took a deep breath. Her face tightened as she reached inside to check the foal's position. When she spoke, her voice was low, but absolutely firm. One leg is back, she confirmed. The foal is coming wrong. If we can't reposition it, we'll lose them both. Can you fix it? Ethan's voice sounded steadier than he felt. I have to. Clara flexed her fingers, then went back in. When I tell you, you pull. Steady, not hard. Steady. Understand? I understand. For what felt like hours but was probably 30 minutes, the only sounds were Willow's labored breathing and Clara's careful commands. Sweat appeared on Clara's forehead despite the barn's freezing temperature. She stopped twice to flex her fingers, her arm trembling from effort, then went right back to work. Ethan watched her hands and saw something that made his chest tighten. She was scared. He could see it in the set of her jaw, the way her breathing quickened. But she didn't quit. She fought for that mare and foal like they belonged to her. Like giving up was simply not an option her mind would consider. Now, Clara said suddenly, she's about to strain. Ropes. Ethan already had them. Soft cotton ropes prepared earlier. He looped them around the foal's legs exactly where Clara pointed, her hands guiding his with quick, precise movements. Willow strained. Clara and Ethan pulled together, matching the mare's efforts, steady and firm. Again, Clara commanded. Another contraction. Another pull. Ethan's muscles burned. Clara's jaw clenched so tight he could see the tendons in her neck stand out like cables. Then with a rush of fluid and one final enormous effort from Willow, the foal slid into the straw. For one terrible heartbeat, it didn't move. Ethan's breath stopped. Time crystallized into this single frozen moment. All the work, all the hope, all the desperate fighting, and still the foal lay motionless in the straw, like something made of wax. Clara was on it immediately. She cleared its nose with her fingers, wiped its face with a clean cloth. She rubbed its ribs hard, murmuring words that were part prayer, part command. "Breathe," she whispered. "Come on, little one. Breathe." Nothing. "Breathe," the foal gasped. A weak cough, a stronger one. Then a thin, sharp cry that filled the stall and echoed off the rafters. Ethan felt his eyes burn. His throat closed. He had seen men die in the war. He had buried his mother and brother. He had thought himself beyond tears. But watching that foal take its first shuddering breath broke something open inside him. Willow lifted her head, nickering softly. She reached toward her baby with instincts older than human civilization. The foal, all legs and awkward newness, wobbled. Tried to stand, failed, tried again. Clara laughed through tears. "She's alive," she whispered. "She's alive." They stayed with them until the mare settled and the foal found milk. Only then did Clara sag back against the stall wall like a puppet with cut strings. All the strength that had been holding her upright suddenly released, and she deflated into exhaustion. Thomas, who had been watching from the doorway in absolute silence, came forward with a blanket. He draped it over Clara's shoulders with the careful tenderness of a child who had learned early that kindness was rare and precious. "You saved them," Thomas said. His voice held wonder. Clara reached up and squeezed his hand. "We saved them, all of us." Outside, the sky was turning pale gray. Dawn was coming. Inside the barn, a new life wobbled on unsteady legs, and three people sat in straw and watched a miracle they had fought for with everything they had. Ethan looked at Clara. Her hair had come completely loose from its pins. Her face was flushed from exertion and cold. Her nightgown was stained with blood and birth fluids. She had never looked more beautiful or more real. He had expected a pretty woman who would flinch at hard work. Instead, he had gotten a woman who had just saved his best mare and her foal with nothing but skill, courage, and absolute refusal to accept defeat. "You should rest," he said quietly. "I will," Clara answered, "after I know they're stable." Ethan looked at her, really looked. And for the first time since his mother died, he felt something in his chest that wasn't grief or fear. It was hope. Fragile as new ice on a creek, but real. At the cabin, Clara tried to wash up, but her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the soap. Ethan pumped fresh water for her and watched her breathe through the cold, watched her refuse to crumble, even as her body trembled with exhaustion. "You should sleep," he said. "I will," she promised. "After I'm sure." But she swayed on her feet. Ethan caught her elbow. "Clara, sleep. That's an order." She looked at him with those green eyes, and he saw past the strength to the vulnerability beneath. She had come 2,000 miles to a place she had never seen to marry a man she didn't know, and her first night had been spent elbow deep in a difficult berth, fighting death and winning. "Did I do well?" she asked quietly. The question surprised him. This woman who had been so confident, so capable, needed to know she had done well. "You did more than well," Ethan said. "You were extraordinary." Clara's eyes filled. She nodded once, then turned toward her room. At the doorway, she paused. "The foal. What will you name her?" Ethan thought of his mother. Thought of the grace required to live in hard country and remain gentle. Thought of the miracle he had just witnessed. "Grace," he said. "Her name is Grace." Clara smiled. It transformed her face, made her look younger and lighter. "Perfect." She disappeared into her room. Ethan stood in the main room as the sun rose, fully painting the cabin walls gold. Through the window, he could see the barn. Could imagine Willow and Grace inside, safe and warm. Thomas came out of his room, still in the clothes he had worn yesterday. The boy looked at Ethan with something like awe. "Is Clara really going to stay?" Thomas asked. "I hope so," Ethan said. "Will I really get to stay?" Ethan knelt down so he was eye level with the boy. He saw himself at 12, scared and uncertain, and desperately wanting to belong somewhere. "Do you want to?" Thomas nodded so hard his whole body moved. "Then you stay. But you work, and you learn. Deal, to deal." Thomas stuck out his hand like he had seen men do. Ethan shook it solemnly. Welcome to Blackwood Ranch, Thomas Reed. Over strong coffee by the fire an hour later, after Thomas had finally fallen asleep on the sofa, Clara emerged from her room. She looked exhausted but calmer. She sat across from Ethan and wrapped her hands around a mug of coffee. I meant what I said in my letter, she told him. I can do this life. I'm not leaving. I believe you, Ethan said. And the surprise was how much he meant it. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. The hospital room had dimmed as evening settled over Montana. James sat forward, elbows on his knees, completely absorbed. That was Mom, he said, on her first night. Ethan nodded, tired from the telling, but lighter somehow. That was Clara, your great-great-grandmother. She saved Willow and Grace before anyone in Birch Creek even knew her name. And Thomas, the kid from the train, what happened to him? You'll find out, Ethan said. But I need to rest now. Come back tomorrow and I'll tell you about Judge Moss, about the railroad trying to take the land, about how your grandmother stood in a courtroom with a Winchester and scared the hell out of men who thought women should be silent. James stood but didn't leave immediately. Dad, why are you telling me this now? Ethan met his son's eyes. Because you need to understand. Being a father isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. Clara didn't come to Montana for romance. She came for partnership. She came to build something that would last. And when things got hard, when they got impossible, she didn't run. She fought. You think I ran from my marriage? Van, you forgot what it means to fight for something bigger than yourself. Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. Tomorrow I'll tell you how we almost lost everything and how we fought back. Come back tomorrow, James. James nodded. He squeezed his father's hand once, then walked out. Ethan closed his eyes. In his mind, he was 34 again, standing in a barn at dawn, watching a woman he had known for 12 hours save a life with nothing but courage and skill. That was the moment he started to fall in love with Clara Whitmore, though it would be weeks before he admitted it even to himself. Outside his hospital window, Montana spread vast and eternal. The same mountains that had watched him be born would watch him die. But before they did, he had a story to finish telling, a legacy to pass on, a son to save the only way he knew how, with truth. Days fell into rhythm at Blackwood Ranch, not the comfortable rhythm of a song, but the hard rhythm of survival. Wake before dawn, feed the animals, check the fences, chop wood, haul water. The work never ended, and that was somehow comforting. Work kept the mind from dwelling on all the things that could go wrong. Clara adapted faster than Ethan expected. She woke at 5 each morning without complaint, her feet hitting the cold floor while darkness still pressed against the windows. She learned to milk the cows with steady hands, learned which hens would tolerate being handled and which would peck. She studied the ranch like a general, studying terrain, noting every detail, every weakness, every opportunity. Thomas followed Ethan like a shadow, eager to learn, desperate to prove his worth. The boy had lived his whole life believing he was a burden. Now, given the chance to be useful, he threw himself into every task with the intensity of someone trying to outrun their past. In the evenings after the work was done and supper cleared away, they sat by the fire. Ethan would read, Clara would mend clothes or work on embroidery. Thomas would practice writing letters on a slate, his tongue stuck out in concentration. They didn't talk much. Words felt unnecessary. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of people learning to exist in the same space without collision. But something was building beneath the surface. Ethan felt it every time Clara handed him coffee in the morning, their fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. Felt it when he watched her work with the horses, competent and fearless. Felt it when she laughed at something Thomas said, and the sound filled the cabin like light breaking through clouds. He tried not to feel it, tried to remember this was a business arrangement. Partnership, as she had said, not romance. But his heart was a poor student of practicality. One morning in early December, Clara made stew using his mother's recipe. Ethan didn't know how she had found it. Maybe she had discovered the handwritten cards in the kitchen drawer. Maybe she had simply guessed at the ingredients through some domestic alchemy he couldn't understand. He took one bite and had to set down his spoon. The taste transported him. He was 12 years old again, sitting at the same table watching his mother stir a pot while humming a song he couldn't remember the name of. The memory was so vivid, so sharp that it cut. What's wrong? Claire asked. Did I make it poorly? Ethan shook his head. He couldn't speak. His throat had closed around something too big for words. Clara understood. She reached across the table and touched his hand. Just once. Just for a moment. Then she went back to eating, giving him the privacy to compose himself. That night, Ethan cried for the first time since burying his brother. Silent tears that tracked down his face as he lay on his bedroll by the dying fire. He cried for his mother, for his brother, for all the years of loneliness he had pretended didn't hurt. He didn't know that Clara lying awake in the next room hurt him. Didn't know that she pressed her hand against the wall that separated them and wished she knew how to ease the pain of a man she was only beginning to understand. On Sundays, they went to church. The whole town turned out for Reverend Thompson's sermons, less out of devotion than out of the need for human connection. In winter, when ranches were isolated by snow and cold, church was where people remembered they belonged to something larger than their own small struggles. The first Sunday, Clara attended, every head turned when they walked in. Ethan, Clara, and Thomas sitting together in a pew near the back. The whispers started immediately rustling through the congregation like wind through dry grass. Mrs. Harris, seated 3 rows ahead, turned to stare openly. Her eyes traveled over Clara's Sunday dress, which was plain but well made, then moved to Thomas, then settled on Ethan, with an expression that mixed curiosity and judgment in equal measure. After the service, people clustered in small groups outside. Ethan tried to steer Clara and Thomas toward the wagon, but Mrs. Harris intercepted them with the determination of a woman on a mission. "So this is the mail order bride," Mrs. Harris said. Her smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Welcome to Birch Creek, dear. I'm sure you'll enjoy your stay." The emphasis on stay made the insult clear. This wasn't a welcome. It was a prediction of failure. Clara met the woman's eyes without flinching. "Thank you, Mrs. Harris. I expect to be here for quite some time. A lifetime, in fact." "We'll see." Mrs. Harris turned to Ethan. "Your mother would have thoughts about you marrying a stranger, Ethan Blackwood. She always said family came first." "My mother would have welcomed anyone who worked as hard as Clara does," Ethan said quietly. "And she would have told you that judgment belongs to good, not to gossips." Mrs. Harris's face flushed red. She turned and marched away, her skirts swishing with indignation. Sheriff Daniel Hayes, who had been standing nearby, approached with an apologetic smile. He was 40, still handsome in a weathered way with kind eyes, and the calm demeanor of a man who had learned to de-escalate situations before they exploded into violence. "Don't mind Martha Harris," he said. "She's been sour since her husband ran off with a saloon girl 10 years ago. Makes her suspicious of any woman who looks like she might have other options." "I have no other options," Clara said. "And if I did, I would still choose to be here." Hayes looked at her with interest. "You're quite something, Mrs. Blackwood. Ethan's a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Clara said, but her hand found Ethan's arm and squeezed gently. Hayes tipped his hat and walked away. Ethan felt a flicker of something hot and uncomfortable in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it as jealousy. The sheriff was handsome, educated, respected. Everything Ethan wasn't. As if reading his thoughts, Clara leaned close and whispered, "Stop thinking whatever you're thinking. I came here for you, not for anyone else." The jealousy evaporated, replaced by something warmer and more dangerous. Gratitude, affection, the early stages of something he didn't dare name. They rode home in comfortable silence, Thomas dozing in the back of the wagon, the December sun weak and pale in a cloudless sky. That night, everything changed. Ethan woke to screaming, his own screaming. He jolted upright on his bedroll chest, heaving, throat raw. Sweat soaked his shirt despite the cabin's cold. His hands shook so badly he had to press them against his thighs to make them stop. The dream was always the same. Montana, 1877. A skirmish with Lakota warriors in a valley that became a killing ground. His friend Thomas shot in the stomach, dying slowly over 20 agonizing minutes. Blood on the grass, screams that didn't stop even after the dying was done. He heard movement. His door opened. Clara stood there in her nightgown, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, concern etched on her face. "I'm sorry," Ethan managed. "I didn't mean to wake you." "You were screaming." Clara came closer, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "You sounded like you were dying." Old memories. Ethan tried to smile, but his face wouldn't cooperate. "The war, it comes back sometimes." "How often is sometimes?" He couldn't lie to those green eyes. 3 or 4 times a week. Clara sat on the floor beside his bedroll, careful to leave space between them, but close enough that he could feel her warmth. Tell me. You don't want to hear it. I do. Her voice was gentle but firm. If we're going to be partners, I need to know what you carry. So he told her. About the war, about watching friends die in ways no man should die, about holding Thomas's hand while the light faded from his eyes, making promises he couldn't keep, about the sounds that still echoed in his head years later, loud as the day they were made. He made me promise to live, Ethan said. Not just survive, live. Live for both of us. He laughed bitterly. I've done a poor job of it. Clara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried no pity, only understanding. You're doing better now. You have this ranch. You have Thomas. You have me. Do I have you? The question came out before he could stop it. Yes. Clara reached out and took his hand. Her grip was strong and sure. You have me, Ethan Blackwood, for as long as you want me. I want you. The words felt dangerous, exposed. I didn't expect to, but I do. Clara squeezed his hand. Then I'm yours, and you don't have to face the nightmares alone anymore. She stayed with him until he fell back asleep. When he woke in the morning, she was gone, but he could still feel the ghost of her hand in his. Something had shifted between them, something fundamental and irrevocable. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Thomas brought it in from where the mail carrier had left it by the gate. The envelope was heavy cream paper, expensive. The return address was Boston. Clara's face went white when she saw it. Ethan watched her hands tremble as she opened it, watched color drain from her cheeks as she read, watched her carefully fold the letter and tuck it into her apron pocket, with movements too controlled to be natural. What is it? He asked. Nothing important, but her voice said otherwise. Clara. She met his eyes and he saw fear there. Real fear. It's from a law office in Boston. They represent my aunt's interests. The letter says the debt my father owed is still outstanding. They're asking where I am. They say there may be legal proceedings. What kind of legal proceedings? I don't know. The letter is deliberately vague. Clara's jaw tightened. But I know my aunt. She doesn't give up easily. If she's involving lawyers, it's because she's found a way to force me back. Ethan felt anger rise hot and quick. Nobody's forcing you anywhere. You don't know these people, Ethan. Judge Rutherford Charles's father has connections throughout Massachusetts. If he decides I owe a debt or broke a contract, he can make my life very difficult. He can try. Ethan took her hands. You're in Montana now. Massachusetts law doesn't reach here. And even if it did, you're married to me. That changes things. Clara looked at their joined hands. Are we married truly? We went through the words, but we haven't. She trailed off blushing. Ethan understood. They slept in separate rooms. They had barely touched beyond accidental brushes. In the eyes of the law, they might be married. But in the eyes of Boston society, a marriage not consummated could be annulled. Before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. Harrison Miller stood on the porch, his face grim. Ethan, we need to talk. It's about the bank. They gathered around the kitchen table. Miller laid out papers with the careful precision of a man delivering bad news. The bank is accelerating the foreclosure timeline. They want payment by December 15th. That's 9 days from now. I don't have $850, Ethan said flatly. I know, which is why we need to discuss options. Miller pulled out another document. This is from Northern Pacific Railway. They're offering $800 for your land. They'll pay the bank directly and you'll have the remaining debt forgiven. And I lose everything my family built. Yes, Miller's voice was heavy, but you'd be free of debt. You could start over somewhere else. I'm not leaving. Ethan stood and walked to the window. Outside, his land stretched in every direction. His land, his legacy. There has to be another way. There might be. Miller hesitated. But it's risky. I've been making inquiries. Judge Moss owns stock in Northern Pacific. If we can prove he's biased, we can request a different judge. That might buy us time. How much time? Months, maybe, long enough to sell cattle in the spring, pay down the debt. Do it, Ethan said. Miller gathered his papers. There's one more thing. For this to work, for the homestead protection to apply fully, you need to be unquestionably married, not just on paper. The court needs to see this as a legitimate family ranch, not a bachelor trying to game the system. After Miller left, Ethan and Clara stood in the kitchen, the weight of unspoken things heavy between them. We should make the marriage real, Clara said quietly, not because we have to, but because it makes sense legally. Is that the only reason? Clara looked at him. No, it's not the only reason. The next day, Reverend Thompson came to the ranch at Ethan's request. He was a thin man in his 60s with kind eyes and hands that trembled slightly from age. I hear you want to formalize your marriage vows, he said. Unusual request given you're already married. We said the word ebrers, Ethan explained, but we want to say them again. Here, at the ranch, make it real. Thompson looked between Ethan and Clara, seeing something in their faces that satisfied him. Very well. Shall we begin? They stood in the main room with the fire crackling and the winter wind pressing against the walls. Thomas stood as witness, his young face solemn with the importance of the moment. Captain Owen had ridden out from town standing straight-backed, despite his year's pride evident in every line of his weathered face. Reverend Thompson opened his Bible. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly. It is a covenant before God and man. Do you both understand this? We do, Ethan and Clara said together. Ethan Blackwood, do you take Clara Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Ethan looked at Clara, really looked. He saw the woman who had saved Willow and Grace, who had stood up to Mrs. Harris, who had held his hand through nightmares, who had crossed a continent to find freedom and found something else instead. I do, he said, before God, before the law, and before this land that's been in my family for 30 years. I take you as my wife. Clara Whitmore, do you take Ethan Blackwood to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Clara's voice was soft but steady. I do. I choose this. I choose him. I choose this life. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Thompson smiled. You may kiss your bride, again. Ethan stepped closer. Clara tilted her face up. Their lips met in a kiss that started chaste and became something more. Something that held promise and hope, and the beginning of real feeling. When they pulled apart, Thomas was grinning. Owen was wiping his eyes. Thompson was closing his Bible with a satisfied nod. You're well and truly married now, the Reverend bawd. May God bless your union. After everyone left, the cabin felt different. The same walls, the same furniture, but the air itself had changed. Clara moved to her bedroom, then paused at the door. Will you help me move my things? She asked. Move them, Barboamo. To your room, our room. She looked at him over her shoulder. Unless you'd prefer I stay separate. Ethan's heart kicked against his ribs. I'd prefer you didn't. They spent the evening moving Clara's belongings. Not much. A trunk of clothes, a brush and mirror. A small wooden box that held items too precious to name. Thomas helped, chattering about how nice it would be to have a real family, until Ethan sent him to bed with gentle firmness. When they were alone, when the door was closed and the lamp turned low, they stood on opposite sides of the bed they would now share. I'm nervous, Clara admitted. So am I. I've never... She trailed off. Neither have I, Ethan said. They both laughed, the tension breaking slightly. Then Clara began unpinning her hair, and Ethan forgot how to breathe. What followed was awkward and tender and achingly real. They learned each other in the darkness with whispers and touches and the careful gentleness of two people who had both been alone too long. Afterward, Clara lay with her head on Ethan's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow to normal rhythm. That wasn't what I expected, she said. Ethan tensed. Disappointing. Better. She propped herself up on one elbow. I expected a transaction. This felt like, she searched for words, like coming home. Ethan pulled her close. You are home. This is home. For both of us. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the cabin like something wild and hungry. Inside, two people held each other and slept without nightmares for the first time in years. The peace aged exactly 4 days. On the fifth day, the sky turned the color of an old bruise. Gray-purple clouds rolled in from the north, moving fast and low. The wind shifted, bringing cold that bit through layers of wool and leather. Ethan stood outside and read the signs. Every animal instinct he possessed screamed warning. "Storm's coming," Owen said, having ridden out to check on them. "Big one, could last 2, 3 days. You got supplies. Enough for a week if we're careful. Get the animals close. Bring in extra wood. Don't go outside once it hits." Owen looked at the sky with the eyes of a man who had survived Montana winters when others hadn't. "This one's going to be bad, Ethan. I can feel it." They worked fast. Ethan and Thomas brought the cattle into the near pasture within sight of the cabin. They stacked wood by the door until they couldn't stack anymore. Clara prepared food that could be eaten cold if the fire went out. The storm hit at 3 in the afternoon. One moment the world was visible. The next it disappeared behind a wall of white. Snow fell in sheets so thick it looked solid. The wind roared like a living thing, shaking the cabin walls, finding every crack and gap to whistle through. They huddled by the fire, listening to the storm rage outside. Thomas's eyes were wide with fear. This was his first Montana blizzard, and the sheer violence of it terrified him. "It's all right," Clara said, pulling the boy close. "The cabin's solid. We're safe." But at 5 o'clock, Thomas went to check on Grace. The filly had been separated from Willow earlier in the day, placed in the near corral, because she had been limping. Thomas looked out the window and gasped. "She's gone. Grace is gone." Ethan was at the window in 3 strides. Through the blowing snow, he could just barely make out the corral. The gate hung open, blown loose by the wind, and in the far distance, almost invisible, a small brown shape moved toward the open pasture. "She'll die out there," Thomas said. "Ethan, she'll freeze." Ethan was already pulling on his coat. "I'll get her." Clara grabbed his arm. "You can't go out in that. You'll get lost." "If I don't go, she dies." Ethan found rope in the storage chest. "I'll tie myself to the porch. Use the rope as a guide back." "It's not enough. The rope will break, or you'll lose it, or—" Clara's voice was rising with panic. "I don't have a choice." Ethan tied one end of the rope around his waist. The other end he secured to the porch support beam. "If I'm not back in 30 minutes, pull the rope. If it's slack, follow it. But don't come until 30 minutes, understand?" Clara's face was white. "Ethan, please." He kissed her hard. "I'll be back, I promise." Then he opened the door and stepped into hell. The wind hit him like a fist. Snow blasted his face instantly, covering his eyelashes and freezing to his skin. He could barely see 10 feet ahead. Breathing was difficult. The cold burned his lungs with every inhalation. He followed the fence line toward where he had seen Grace. 50 feet, 100. The rope pulled at his waist, already feeling too thin, too fragile. He should have used thicker rope, should have waited for the storm to pass, should have done 100 things differently. But Grace was out here scared and alone, and he had promised Thomas he would protect her. 200 feet from the cabin, he found her. The filly stood shivering violently, head down, snow accumulating on her back. She was too cold to run when Ethan approached. He got a lead rope around her neck and turned to head back. That's when he realized he couldn't see the cabin. The world was nothing but white, no landmarks, no reference points, just endless snow and wind that tried to push him off his feet. The rope. Follow the rope back. Ethan reached for it and felt his stomach drop. The rope hung loose in his hands. The knot at his waist had come untied, or the rope had broken. Either way, his lifeline was gone. Panic tried to claw its way up his throat. He forced it down. Panic killed men in blizzards. He had to think, had to use what he knew. The wind was coming from the north. The cabin was south of where he stood. If he kept the wind at his back and walked steady, he should hit the cabin, or at least the barn. Should. He started walking, leading Grace, his face so cold he couldn't feel it anymore. His hands were going numb inside his gloves. His feet felt like blocks of ice attached to stumps that used to be legs. Time lost meaning. He might have been walking for 5 minutes or 50. The world narrowed to the next step. Then the next. Then the next. His thoughts began to slow. That was dangerous. That was the cold working its way into his brain. He thought about sitting down, just for a minute, just to rest. Then he heard something, a voice faint and distant, almost lost in the wind. "Ethan." He tried to shout back, but his mouth wouldn't cooperate. The muscles in his jaw had stopped responding. A shape emerged from the white, Clara tied to a rope holding a lantern that barely penetrated the storm. Her face was desperate, determined, furious. She grabbed his arm with strength that shocked him. "Follow the rope now." They stumbled through the blizzard, Clara pulling Ethan pulling Grace. The rope led them home through the chaos. When the cabin finally appeared out of the white like a miracle, Ethan wanted to cry. Inside, warmth hit him like a hammer. Thomas was there, pulling off Ethan's frozen coat. Clara was stripping his gloves, his boots revealing skin that was bone white and waxy. Grace was led to a corner where blankets were piled, and Thomas rubbed her down with frantic energy. "You're freezing," Clara said. Her voice shook with something that might have been rage or terror or both. "You're hypothermic." "I'm fine," Ethan tried to say, but his words came out slurred. "You're not fine." Clara pushed him toward the bedroom. "Get in the bed, now." "I need to check on Grace. Need to make sure she's—" "Thomas has Grace. You need to warm up before you die." She shoved quilts over him, then climbed into the bed fully dressed, pressing against him. "Body heat. Be still." Ethan shook so hard the whole bed rattled. His teeth chattered. His muscles spasmed. Clara held him through it, rubbing his arms, his chest, trying to force warmth back into his frozen core. "You scared me," she whispered. "I thought I'd lose you." "Had to save Grace," promised Thomas. "You matter more." The words exploded out of her. "You stupid, brave, impossible man. You matter more than a horse. You matter more than any animal on this ranch. You matter to me." Through the shaking, through the fog of cold that still gripped his brain, Ethan heard the truth in her voice. She cared, not as a business partner, not as a mail-order bride fulfilling an obligation. She cared about him, Ethan Blackwood, broken soldier and stubborn rancher. "I'm sorry," he managed. "I didn't think." "No, you didn't." Clara's voice was fierce. "If you die, what happens to Thomas? What happens to this ranch? What happens to me?" She pulled back to look at his face. Tears tracked down her cheeks. "I didn't come 2,000 miles to watch you kill yourself being heroic. I won't do it again. Promise me." "I promise." She kissed him then, not gentle, almost violent, a kiss that tasted like fear and relief and something deeper that neither of them had named yet. "I love you," Ethan said. The words came out before he could stop them. "I know it's only been a few weeks, but I love you, Clara." Clara went very still. Then she smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I love you too. I have since you knelt beside Willow and trusted me to save her. Since you welcomed Thomas without hesitation. Since you held my hand through your nightmares." She kissed him again. "We're in this together now. For real." What happened next was different from their wedding night. That had been careful exploration. This was desperate affirmation of life in the face of death. They made love while the storm raged outside, while Thomas slept by the fire, while Grace recovered in her corner. Afterward, they lay tangled together under every blanket in the house. Clara traced the scars on Ethan's chest, old wounds from the war. "You're going to be careful from now on," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm going to try." "Not try, do." She propped herself up on one elbow. "I need you alive, Ethan Blackwood. We have a ranch to save, a boy to raise, a life to build. I can't do it alone. You won't have to." He pulled her close. "We're partners. Remember." "Partners," she agreed, "in everything." The storm lasted 2 days. When it finally passed, the world outside was transformed. Snow drifted as high as the cabin windows in places. The cattle had survived, huddled together for warmth. Grace was fine, recovered fully following Thomas around like a puppy. But something had changed inside the cabin too. Ethan and Clara moved around each other with the unconscious synchronization of people who had crossed a threshold and couldn't go back. They touched constantly. A hand on a shoulder, fingers brushing as they passed. Small gestures that spoke volumes. Thomas noticed. "You two seem happy," he said one morning. "We are," Clara said simply. "Good." The boy smiled. "I like it when people are happy." 2 weeks later, Clara began feeling sick in the mornings. At first she thought it was something she ate, bad pork maybe, or milk that had turned. But when it continued for 3 days straight, and when her monthly courses failed to arrive on schedule, she began to suspect. Beatrice would have known immediately. Her aunt had been a nurse during the Civil War, had helped dozens of women through pregnancy and childbirth. But Beatrice was in Boston, probably still furious at Clara for running away. Clara kept her suspicions to herself for another week. Then one evening, as she and Ethan sat by the fire, she couldn't hold it in anymore. "Ethan, I need to tell you something." He looked up from the harness he was mending. "What is it?" "I'm late." He blinked. "Late for what?" "My monthly courses. I'm 2 weeks late." Understanding dawned slowly across his face. "You think you're pregnant?" "Yes, I think I'm pregnant." The silence stretched. Clara watched emotions play across Ethan's face. Shock, joy, then terrifyingly fear. "Ethan," her voice came out small. He stood abruptly and walked to the window. His shoulders were rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. "My mother died giving birth to my brother," he said quietly. "She bled for hours. The doctor couldn't stop it. She died in this cabin in terrible pain, and there was nothing anyone could do." Clara's heart clenched. "Ethan, I'm not your mother." "I know, but childbirth is dangerous. Women die. Strong women, healthy women." He turned to face her, and she saw the naked terror in his eyes. "I can't lose you, Clara. I can't." She went to him, took his face in her hands. "You won't lose me. I'm strong. I know what to expect. My father taught me anatomy physiology. I'm not going into this blind." "That doesn't make it safe." "Nothing in life is safe." She kissed him gently. "But we face it together, like we faced everything else." Ethan pulled her into his arms and held her like she might disappear. "I'm scared." "So am I," Clara admitted. "But I'm also happy. We're going to have a child, Ethan. Our child. A new life in this place we're building together." He rested his forehead against hers. "If anything happens to you." "It won't, I promise." But even as she said it, Clara felt her own fear coiling in her stomach. Her mother had died in childbirth. Her aunt had told her stories of women who didn't survive. The frontier was littered with graves of young mothers. She pushed the fear down, locked it away. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. That night they told Thomas. The boy's face lit up like a lantern. "A baby." "Really, really," Clara confirmed. "You're going to be a big brother." Thomas threw his arms around her with such enthusiasm she almost fell over. "I've never been a big brother before. I'll teach the baby everything. How to ride, how to shoot, how to—" "The baby won't be doing any of that for a few years," Ethan said, but he was smiling. They sat together by the fire, making plans, imagining a future that suddenly felt more real than it had before. A family. Not one cobbled together from desperation and necessity, but a real family bound by love and choice and the tiny life growing inside Clara's body. Outside Montana, winter gripped the land with iron claws. Inside, hope bloomed fragile and fierce. On December 28th, a visitor arrived. Ethan heard the wagon before he saw it. The sound of wheels on frozen ground, the jingle of expensive tack. He walked outside, hand instinctively moving toward the rifle by the door. The wagon was fine, too fine for Birch Creek, black lacquered wood and brass fittings. The horse pulling it was a Cleveland Bay, the kind of animal that cost more than most men earned in a year. A woman climbed down with the help of the driver. She was in her 50s, dressed in a traveling suit of gray wool that screamed Boston quality. Her face was pale, drawn, with eyes that held something Ethan couldn't quite identify. Worry, maybe, or fear. Behind her climbed two men in dark suits. Lawyers Ethan knew immediately. They had the look, self-important, certain of their own correctness. Clara appeared in the doorway and went absolutely white. "Aunt Beatrice," she whispered. The older woman's composure cracked. "Clara, thank God." Beatrice Whitmore looked like she belonged in a city parlor, not on a Montana ranch in the dead of winter. But here she was, stepping carefully around frozen mud puddles, her eyes locked on Clara with an intensity that made Ethan's protective instincts flare. "Mrs. Blackwood," one of the lawyers said, stepping forward. "I'm Harold Pierce, attorney at law from Boston. This is Samuel Cross, local counsel from Helena. We've come on behalf of Mrs. Whitmore to ascertain your well-being." "I'm fine," Clara said. Her voice was ice. "Are you here of your own free will?" Pierce asked. It's come to Mrs. Whitmore's attention that you may have been coerced into a marriage arrangement that was not entirely voluntary. Ethan stepped forward, putting himself between the lawyers and Clara. I didn't coerce anyone. My wife came here by choice. She stays by choice. Your alleged wife, Pierce corrected. Mail-order marriages are often vehicles for exploitation. We need to ensure Clara hasn't been taken advantage of. I haven't been taken advantage of, Clara snapped. She moved to stand beside Ethan, shoulders to shoulder. I came to Montana because my aunt wanted me to marry a man I despised. I chose Ethan. I choose this life. And I choose to tell you to leave. Beatrice flinched as if slapped. Clara, please. I didn't come to take you away. I came to apologize. The words hung in the cold air. Clara stared at her aunt, clearly not trusting what she had heard. Apologize. Beatrice's voice shook. After you left, I learned things about Charles Rutherford. Terrible things. There was another girl, younger than you. She was engaged to him for 3 months. Then she died. They called it an accident, but she closed her eyes. I learned he had beaten her. Regularly. Violently. When I realized what I had tried to force you into, what I had been willing to sacrifice for money and respectability, I was horrified. Clara's face was stone. You called me selfish, ungrateful. You threw me out. I was wrong. Beatrice took a step closer. I was terrified and angry and wrong. I thought I was protecting you by securing you a wealthy husband. Instead, I almost fed you to a monster. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm sorry, Clara. I'm so sorry. The two lawyers stood awkwardly to the side, clearly uncomfortable, witnessing this family drama. Ethan watched Clara's face, watched her struggle with years of hurt and anger, watched her armor crack, revealing the girl underneath who had lost her mother, lost her father, lost the only family she had left. Why now? Clara asked. Why come all this way? Because I got your letter, the one you sent 2 months ago telling me you were safe. I didn't believe it. I thought some man had forced you to write it, so I came to see for myself. Beatrice looked at Ethan properly for the first time. I came expecting to hate you, Mr. Blackwood. I expected a brute, a con man, someone who saw my niece as property. And now, Ethan asked quietly, now I see a man who stands beside her, not in front of her. A man who lets her speak for herself. A man she looks at with, Beatrice paused, with love, real love. Clara's hand found Ethan's, their fingers intertwined. Samuel Cross cleared his throat. If I may interject, I have information about the Northern Pacific Railway situation. I heard you're fighting a foreclosure. Ethan turned to the Helena lawyer. What do you know about it? I know Judge Moss is corrupt. I know he's trying to steal your land for the railroad. And I know how to stop him. Cross pulled papers from his bag. I've been investigating Moss for years. He's done this to 12 other families in Montana Territory. Every time the railroad benefits. Every time Moss's stock portfolio grows. Can you prove it? I can, now. I have bank records showing direct payments from Northern Pacific to Moss's personal accounts. I have testimony from other landowners he's defrauded. Give me 2 weeks and I can have him removed from the bench and your case dismissed. Hope flared in Ethan's chest. Why are you helping us? Cross's face hardened. Because 20 years ago, my father lost his ranch to a scheme just like this. The court awarded him $200 for land worth $2,000. He drank himself to death within 5 years. I became a lawyer to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. The machines in the hospital room beeped their steady rhythm. The sun was setting outside, painting the Montana mountains in shades of orange and gold. James sat forward, completely absorbed. So Grandma's aunt came all that way to apologize. She did, Ethan confirmed. Beatrice stayed in Birch Creek for months. She was there when your mother was born. She helped save Clara's life during that delivery. And the railroad, did you lose the ranch? That's the next part of the story. Ethan's voice was getting weaker. Come back tomorrow and I'll tell you about the courtroom battle, about how your grandmother stood up to Judge Moss, about Thomas growing into a man, about the day Rose was born and we almost lost everything. James stood reluctantly. I don't want to tire you out. I'm dying, son. Everything tires me out. Ethan managed a weak smile, but I have more to tell. The most important parts are still coming. James squeezed his father's hand and left. Alone in the darkening room, Ethan closed his eyes and remembered. Remembered Clara standing beside him, pregnant and fierce. Remembered Beatrice apologizing with tears streaming down her face. Remembered the moment he realized they might actually win, might actually keep the land, might actually build the legacy he had promised his mother. The story wasn't over, not yet. Tomorrow he would tell James about the courtroom battle about fighting corruption, with truth about the moment Clara brought Rose into the world and almost died doing it. Tomorrow he would finish the lesson his son needed to learn. A man builds, a man teaches, a man leaves something worth more than gold. Outside his window, Montana waited patient and eternal. Beatrice Whitmore did not go back to Boston. She took a room at the boarding house in Birch Creek, the one run by Mrs. Harris, who charged too much and provided too little warmth. But Beatrice paid without complaint and rode out to Blackwood Ranch every morning, arriving with the sun and staying until dark. At first, Clara didn't know what to do with her aunt's presence. Years of hurt and anger don't evaporate with a single apology. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table like strangers, words careful, and measured the past looming between them like a wall neither knew how to scale. But slowly, brick by brick, they began to dismantle it. Beatrice showed Clara how to knit booties for the baby. Clara taught Beatrice how to milk cows without getting kicked. They worked side by side, preparing meals, washing clothes, the rhythm of domestic labor, creating a language that needed no words. One afternoon, as they kneaded bread together, Beatrice spoke quietly. "Your mother would be proud of you." While Clara's hands stilled in the dough. "Would she? She always wanted you to be strong, independent. When she was dying, she made me promise to let you make your own choices." Beatrice's voice cracked. "I broke that promise. I tried to control you instead of trust you. She would have been ashamed of me." Clara looked at her aunt, really looked. She saw an older woman carrying the weight of her mistakes, trying to atone in the only way she knew how. And Clara realized that holding on to anger was exhausting. Forgiveness, even imperfect forgiveness, might be lighter. "She would forgive you," Clara said softly. "So I will too." Beatrice's eyes filled. They embraced awkwardly, flower dusting both their dresses, the bread forgotten. It wasn't a complete healing. Some wounds leave scars that never fully fade. But it was a beginning. Samuel Cross worked with the intensity of a man on a mission. He transformed Ethan's small cabin into a legal war room, papers spread across every surface documenting years of Judge Moss's corruption. "Look at this," Cross said one evening holding up bank statements. "Moss received $3,000 from Northern Pacific in 1882, another $5,000 in 83. Every payment coincides with a land case he presided over." Harold Pierce, the Boston lawyer, examined the documents with professional precision. "This is solid evidence, but we need more. We need witnesses, people he's defrauded who are willing to testify." "I have 12 families," Cross said, 12 ranchers and farmers who lost land to eminent domain cases Moss handled. All of them got far less than fair market value, and all of them watched the railroad profit." Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Will they testify?" "Some will, others are afraid. Moss is powerful. He can make life difficult for people who cross him. Then we make sure he can't hurt anyone anymore." Ethan's voice was steel. "We expose him, publicly, completely, so he never does this to another family." The trial was scheduled for January 5th, 1885. That gave them less than 2 weeks to prepare. They worked around the clock, cross-drafted legal briefs, Pierce interviewed witnesses. Ethan and Thomas rode to neighboring ranches, convincing reluctant men to speak truth to power. Clara organized documentation, her neat handwriting filling page after page with facts, figures, dates. Captain Owen came by most evenings offering wisdom from his years of military strategy. "This is war," he told Ethan. "Different weapons, same principles. Know your enemy, control the terrain, strike hard and don't give them time to recover." On New Year's Day, they had a strategy session around the kitchen table. Cross laid out the plan. "We start by establishing the pattern of corruption. We show the court that Moss has been taking money from Northern Pacific for years. Then we bring in witnesses who lost land under suspicious circumstances. We paint a picture of systematic fraud." "What about Ethan's case specifically?" Pierce asked. "We prove the land is worth far more than Northern Pacific claims. We show the improvements Ethan has made. The water system, the fencing, the livestock. We demonstrate that this is a functioning family homestead protected under territorial law. And if Moss tries to shut us down, Cross smiled grimly. That's where you come in, Pierce. You're not from Montana. You have no stake in local politics. If Moss tries to silence you, it looks like he's afraid of outside scrutiny. He's trapped either way. The night before the trial, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay beside Clara, listening to her breathe, feeling the slight swell of her belly where their child grew. Everything he had was at stake tomorrow. The land his parents had died for. The home he was trying to build. The future of his family. Clara stirred. You're thinking too loud. Sorry. She rolled to face him. In the moonlight filtering through the window, her eyes were dark and serious. We're going to win. You don't know that. I do. She placed his hand on her belly. Because we have to. This baby needs a home. Thomas needs a future. We need this land. So we're going to fight and we're going to win. Ethan kissed her forehead. When did you become so fierce? The day I decided to answer your advertisement. She smiled. I didn't come all this way to lose. January 5th dawned cold and clear. The courthouse in Birch Creek was a simple building wood frame with a tin roof, but today it felt like the center of the universe. People packed the benches. Word had spread about the trial. Ranchers came from 50 miles around, wanting to see if someone could finally stand up to Judge Moss and the railroad. Mrs. Harris sat in the front row, her face a mask of curiosity. Sheriff Hayes stood by the door, ready to maintain order if things got heated. Judge Theodore Moss entered through a side door. He was 65 with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. His black robes gave him the appearance of a crow, predatory and watchful. His eyes swept the courtroom and landed on Ethan with something cold and calculating. The railroad's lawyer was Richard Hastings, formerly the territory's attorney general. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the confidence of a man who rarely lost. Beside him sat Victor Kane, the railroad agent, who had visited Ethan months ago. Kane's face was smug. On Ethan's side sat Samuel Cross, Harold Pierce, and Harrison Miller. Behind them in the first row, Clara sat between Beatrice and Thomas. Clara wore her best dress, navy blue, with simple white trim. Her hands rested on her stomach, protective and defiant. Moss banged his gavel. This court is now in session. Case number 84-42, Northern Pacific Railway Company versus Ethan Blackwood regarding eminent domain proceedings for property designated Section 12 Township 15 North. Hastings rose smoothly. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter. The railroad requires access through Mr. Blackwood's property to complete a vital transportation link. We have offered fair compensation of $500, which exceeds the property's assessed value. We request the court grant our eminent domain petition and order the transfer of land. Cross stood. He wasn't as polished as Hastings, but his voice carried conviction. Your Honor, this is not a straightforward matter. It's systematic fraud, and we intend to prove it. Moss's expression darkened. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Cross. I make it with full awareness of its seriousness. Cross pulled out a thick folder. I have evidence that Your Honor has received substantial payments from Northern Pacific Railway over the past 5 years. Payments that coincide exactly with eminent domain cases you presided over. I have documentation of 12 families who lost land under your rulings, all at values far below market rate. I have testimony ready to show a pattern of corruption that has enriched you personally while destroying the lives of honest homesteaders. The courtroom erupted. Voices rose in shock and anger. Moss banged his gavel repeatedly. Order, order in this court. Hastings shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. Mr. Cross is attempting to turn a simple land dispute into a witch hunt. I move to have him held in contempt. Your Honor, Pierce spoke for the first time, his Boston accent cutting through the chaos. I am Harold Pierce, licensed to practice law in Massachusetts and registered with this court as visiting counsel. I have reviewed Mr. Cross's evidence personally. It is substantial, well-documented, and credible. If you refuse to allow it, we will take this matter to the territorial capital and request a federal investigation. Moss went very still. Federal investigation was the one threat he couldn't ignore. If territorial authorities got involved, his corruption would be exposed beyond any hope of cover-up. This court will take a 30-minute recess, Moss said through grated teeth. Mr. Cross, Mr. Pierce approached the bench. The next 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. Ethan sat rigid in his chair watching through the window as Moss, Cross, and Pierce argued in the judge's chambers. Clara reached across the rail and squeezed his shoulder. Thomas sat pale and worried. Owen leaned forward from the row behind and whispered, "They've got him cornered. Watch what happens next." When they returned, Moss's face was like carved stone. He sat behind the bench and spoke in a voice devoid of emotion. After reviewing the matter, this court recognizes that questions have been raised about potential conflicts of interest. Therefore, I am recusing myself from this case. A new judge will be appointed from Helena. This trial is postponed until such appointment is made. Court adjourned. The gavel came down like a gunshot. The courtroom exploded with noise. People were shouting, some in triumph, others in shock. Victor Kane stormed out, his face purple with rage. Hastings gathered his papers with jerky, angry movements. Ethan turned to Cross. "What just happened?" "We won." Cross was grinning. "Not the case yet, but the battle. Moss is out. We'll get a fair judge now. And with the evidence we have, Northern Pacific will either offer you real money for that land or drop the eminent domain petition entirely." Pierce added, "They'll drop it. No judge will approve eminent domain when the previous judge was taking bribes from the petitioner. The whole case is poisoned." Clara pushed through the rail and threw her arms around Ethan. "We did it. We actually did it." People crowded around, offering congratulations. Captain Owen clapped Ethan on the back hard enough to knock him forward. Beatrice was crying again, this time with joy. Even Sheriff Hayes came over to shake hands. Only Thomas stood apart, looking confused. "But we didn't go to trial. We didn't have witnesses or anything." Ethan knelt to the boy's level. "Sometimes the threat of truth is more powerful than truth itself. Judge Moss knew if we exposed him, he'd lose everything. His reputation, his position, maybe even his freedom. So he ran. Is the ranch safe now?" "Not completely. We still owe the bank. But we bought ourselves time." Ethan ruffled Thomas's hair. "Time to make the spring cattle sale. Time to pay down the debt. Time to fight another day." Outside the courthouse, Ethan found Victor Kane waiting by the hitching posts. The railroad agent's smooth confidence had evaporated, replaced by barely controlled fury. "You think you've won," Kane said. "Pues, you haven't. We'll find another route. Or we'll wait until you default on your bank loan. Either way, we'll have that land." Ethan stepped close enough that Kane had to look up to meet his eyes. "You're welcome to try, but now everyone knows what you are. A thief in a suit. Every rancher in this territory will be watching. Every judge will know you tried to bribe Moss. You've lost your advantage." Kane's jaw clenched. "This isn't over, Blackwood." "No," Ethan agreed, "but you're not winning anymore." Kane mounted his expensive horse and rode away. Ethan watched him go, feeling something settle in his chest. Not victory, not yet, but possibility. The possibility of keeping his land, of raising his child here, of building something that would last. That night they celebrated at the cabin. Beatrice cooked a roast that filled the small space with rich smells. Cross and Pierce joined them along with Owen and Miller. They ate and drank and told stories, the tension of the past weeks finally releasing. Thomas sat at the table with the adults, beaming as Owen recounted his testimony preparation. "The boy's a natural witness, clear, honest, unshakable. If we'd gone to trial, he would have been our secret weapon." "I was scared," Thomas admitted. "Being scared and doing it anyway," Owen said. "That's what courage is." Later, after the guests had gone and Thomas was asleep, Ethan and Clara stood on the porch looking at the stars. Her hand rested on her belly where their daughter was growing. They didn't know it was a daughter yet, but Ethan had started thinking of the baby as if his heart knew something his mind didn't. "Do you think it's really over?" Clara asked. "The legal battle, probably. The railroad will find another route. Judge Moss will retire quietly to avoid prosecution. We'll make our cattle sale in the spring, pay the bank, and breathe easier." "But you're not certain." "I'm certain of this." He pulled her close. "Whatever comes, we face it together. You, me, Thomas, and the baby. That's enough." Clara tilted her face up. He kissed her under Montana stars, and for that moment, everything was perfect. Winter released its grip slowly. February brought days when the temperature rose above freezing, turning snow to slush. March arrived with rain that washed away the last remnants of winter. By April, the land was greening and life was returning to the high country. Clara's belly swelled with the baby. She moved more carefully now, one hand always supporting her back. Beatrice hovered constantly, applying her nursing knowledge to monitor Clara's health. She checked for swelling in Clara's ankles, listened to the baby's heartbeat through her belly, and insisted Clara rest more than Clara wanted to. "I'm pregnant, not dying," Clara protested one afternoon. "Your mother said the same thing," Beatrice replied quietly. Right up until the moment everything went wrong. The words hung heavy between them. Clara's mother had died in childbirth. It was the unspoken fear that shadowed every day of this pregnancy. Thomas was growing, not just physically, though he had shot up 3 inches since arriving at the ranch, but in confidence and capability. Ethan taught him everything: how to repair tack, how to read weather, how to gentle a nervous horse, how to be a man. One afternoon in early May, Ethan took Thomas to the far pasture to check the fence line. They rode in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from spending months working side by side. "Ethan," Thomas said suddenly, "can I ask you something?" "Always. When the baby comes, will I still be part of the family?" Ethan pulled his horse to a stop. He turned to face the boy. "Thomas, you are family. Blood doesn't make family. Choice does. I chose you the day Clara brought you off that stage. You chose us when you decided to stay and work. That's not going to change because a baby arrives. But the baby will be yours, really yours. You're really mine too." Ethan's voice was firm. "When this baby is old enough to understand, I'll tell her about her big brother Thomas, about how he came to us when we needed him most, about how he saved Grace in the blizzard and worked harder than any boy I've ever known. You're not going anywhere, understand?" Thomas's eyes were wet. "Yes, sir." "And stop calling me sir. Makes me feel ancient." They finished checking the fence, but something had shifted. Thomas sat taller in his saddle, moved with more confidence. Ethan recognized the change. It was the same change he had seen in young soldiers who finally believed they belonged. By late July, Clara was enormous. Doc Morrison came out weekly to check on her, his concern growing with each visit. "The baby is large," he told Ethan privately, "and Clara's pelvis is narrow. This could be a difficult delivery." "How difficult?" Morrison chose his words carefully. "I've seen women Clara's size deliver large babies without problems. I've also seen the opposite. We won't know until labor begins. But I want you prepared. This might be dangerous for both mother and child." Ethan felt his old fear rising, the specter of his mother's death reaching across the years to haunt him. "What can we do?" "Keep her healthy, keep her resting, and when the time comes, pray." Ethan told Clara what Morrison had said. She listened with the calm that had become her shield against fear. "I'm not afraid," she lied. "Yes, you are, so am I." He took her hand. "But we're in this together." She squeezed back. Together. August arrived with heat that made the pregnant woman miserable. Clara couldn't sleep, couldn't get comfortable, spent her days moving between the porch and the cabin, seeking relief that never came. On August 25th, 2 weeks before the baby was due, Clara woke Ethan at 4 in the morning. "It's time," she said simply. Ethan bolted upright. "Are you sure?" "My water broke. The contractions started an hour ago, I'm sure." Ethan moved into action. He woke Thomas and sent him racing to Birch Creek to fetch Doc Morrison. He woke Beatrice, who took charge immediately with the efficiency of a field nurse. He stoked the fire, boiled water, gathered clean linens. Clara labored through the morning. The contractions were strong but manageable. She walked the cabin, breathing through the pain, Beatrice at her side offering encouragement. By noon, Morrison still hadn't arrived. Thomas returned, pale and shaking. "The doc's not in town, Mrs. Harris said he went to a ranch 30 miles south. A woman having twins. He won't be back until tomorrow." Ethan felt his heart drop. "Clara can't wait until tomorrow." Beatrice's face was grim. "Then we deliver this baby ourselves." The labor intensified through the afternoon. Clara's calm began to crack as the pain grew worse. She gripped Beatrice's hand hard enough to leave marks. Sweat soaked her hair, her nightgown. Her breathing came in harsh gasps. By evening, she was in agony. The contractions came one on top of another, giving her no rest. But the baby wasn't coming. Clara pushed when Beatrice told her to push, but nothing happened. "Something's wrong," Beatrice said quietly to Ethan. The baby's stuck. The shoulders are too wide. What do we do? I don't know. Beatrice's voice shook. I'm a nurse, not a midwife. I don't know how to fix this. Ethan looked at Clara. She was beyond exhaustion, her strength draining away with each failed push. Her face was gray. Her eyes had started to glaze. He made a decision. He pushed into the bedroom despite Beatrice's protests. Ethan, you shouldn't be in here, Beatrice said. This is my wife, my child. I'm not leaving. He knelt beside the bed and took Clara's face in his hands. Her eyes struggled to focus on him. Clara, look at me. She managed to focus. Ethan, I can't. I'm so tired. I know, but you have to fight. Just a little longer. His voice broke. You saved Willow when everyone thought she'd die. You saved me in that blizzard. You stood up to Judge Moss. You are the strongest person I know. You can do this. I'm scared. So am I, but that baby needs you. Thomas needs you. I need you. He pressed his forehead to hers. One more push, Clara. Give me one more. Beatrice moved back into position. Next contraction, you push with everything you have left. The contraction came. Clara screamed a sound of absolute agony and determination. She pushed. Beatrice's hands worked frantically. The shoulders through, again, push again. Another push, another scream. At 8:47 in the evening, Rose Beatrice Blackwood entered the world. She didn't cry immediately. For 3 terrible heartbeats, she lay silent in Beatrice's hands, tiny and blue. Then Beatrice rubbed her vigorously with a towel, cleared her mouth, and the baby gasped. A weak cry, then stronger. Then a full-throated wail of outrage at being forced into cold air and bright light. Ethan sobbed. He couldn't help it. The relief was so overwhelming, it broke through every wall he had built. Clara reached for the baby with shaking hands. Beatrice laid Rose on her chest, and mother and daughter looked at each other for the first time. She's perfect, Clara whispered. She's a fighter, Beatrice said, wiping her own tears, just like her mother. But the danger wasn't over. Clara began to hemorrhage. Blood soaked the sheets faster than Beatrice could change them. Get me cold water and more linens, Beatrice snapped at Ethan. Now, the next hour was a blur of desperate activity. Beatrice worked with the focused intensity of someone who had seen this before, who knew how quickly a woman could bleed to death. She packed, pressed, did everything she had learned during the war. Finally, mercifully, the bleeding slowed, then stopped. Clara's color began to return, though she was weak as a newborn kitten herself. Doc Morrison arrived at midnight, having ridden hard when he got word. He examined Clara and Rose, checked Beatrice's work, and nodded approval. You saved them both, he told Beatrice. If you hadn't known what to do, we'd be planning a funeral instead of a celebration. Beatrice sat heavily in a chair, the adrenaline finally draining away. I almost lost them. I was terrified. But you didn't lose them. That's what matters. In the bedroom, Ethan lay beside Clara with Rose nestled between them. The baby was asleep, her tiny face peaceful. Clara's hand rested on Rose's chest, feeling the rise and fall of breathing. We did it, Clara said. You did it. We, all of us. She looked at him. Is Beatrice all right? Shaken, but proud. She saved our daughter's life, and mine. I know. Thomas appeared in the doorway, hesitant. Can I see her? Come here, Clara said. Thomas approached carefully as if the baby might break. He looked down at Rose with wonder. She's so small. You were small once too, Ethan said. Can I touch her? Clara guided Thomas's hand to Rose's. The baby's tiny fingers reflexively gripped Thomas's finger. The boy's face lit up like sunrise. She's holding my hand. She knows you're her big brother, Clara said. Thomas stayed there for a long time, letting Rose hold his finger, his face full of awe and love and fierce protectiveness. Ethan watched and understood. This was family. Not blood, though Rose was blood, but choice and love, and the bonds they had forged through hardship and hope. The hospital room was dim. Outside, the sun had set completely, leaving only the glow of city lights against the mountains. James sat forward, his elbows on his knees. Mom almost died when she was born. Yes, Ethan said. His voice was barely a whisper now. We almost lost everything that night, but your grandmother fought, and Beatrice fought, and we all fought together. What happened to Beatrice? Did she stay? Ethan smiled. She bought a house in Birch Creek, stayed for the rest of her life. helped raise Rose, became the town's unofficial nurse. She died in 1920 at age 85, surrounded by people who loved her. And Thomas? Thomas stayed at the ranch, married a girl from town in 1895. They had 6 children. My grandfather gave him half the ranch in 1900 when he expanded to 1,200 acres. He ran his section until he died in 1968. Your mother inherited his portion when he passed. James's eyes were wet. Dad, I never knew all this. The legal battles, the near death in childbirth, Thomas becoming part of the family. Because I never told you. Ethan's face was lined with regret. I thought it was ancient history, but it's not history. It's legacy. What's the difference? History is what happened. Legacy is what it means. Ethan struggled to sit up more. James helped adjust the pillows. Your mother didn't just inherit land. She inherited the lesson that family isn't just blood, that you fight for what matters, that you build something bigger than yourself. But I failed at that. I lost my family. No, Ethan's voice gained strength. You lost a marriage. That happens. But you haven't lost your children. Not unless you give up. The court gave Sarah full custody. Courts can be wrong. I proved that with Judge Moss. Ethan gripped James's hand with surprising strength. You want your children back. Don't argue in court. Build something. Show them through actions, not words that you're a man they can count on. How Tauia, the same way I built Blackwood Ranch, the same way Thomas earned his place in our family. Work, sacrifice, prove through your life that you're worth trusting. Ethan paused, breathing hard. You told me you bought land. 50 acres near Helena. Took out a loan. I'm going to build a house. Big enough for the kids to visit. That's a start, but it can't just be a house. It has to be a home. Fill it with purpose. Make it a place where your children want to be, not have to be. I don't know how. Yes, you do. I taught you. I taught you how to work with your hands, how to build things that last. You're an engineer, for God's sake. You build bridges. Build a bridge back to your children. James was crying now, not trying to hide it. I'm scared I'm too late. I was 34 when I met your grandmother. Broken, in debt, alone. 3 months later, I had a wife, a son, and a baby on the way. It's never too late if you're willing to do the work. What if I fail? Then you fail trying. That's better than not trying at all. Ethan's breathing was getting labored. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll teach your grandchildren this story, all of it. The debt, the corruption, the blizzard, the difficult birth, all of it. Because that's how legacy works. You pass down not just the land, but the lessons. I promise. Good. Ethan closed his eyes. Now let me rest. Come back tomorrow. I want to tell you about the next 40 years. About how Rose grew up, about meeting your mother, about the day you were born. Dad, you're exhausted. Maybe we should stop. No. Ethan's eyes opened fierce despite his weakness. I don't have much time. Days, maybe. I need to finish this. I need you to hear all of it. James nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He stood, kissed his father's forehead, and walked to the door. James, he turned back. Yeah, Dad. I'm proud of you. Your mother would be proud, too. James left before Ethan could see him break down completely. 3 months later, on a bright November morning, James stood on his 50 acres and watched his children climb out of Sarah's car. The court had agreed to supervise visitation. 4 hours every Saturday. It wasn't much, but it was a start. His son Jake was 10. His daughter Emma was 8. They looked uncertain, like they weren't sure they were allowed to be here. Hi, guys, James said, keeping his voice steady. Thanks for coming. Mom says we have to, Jake said, but there was curiosity in his eyes. Well, I'm glad you're here either way. James gestured at the land. Want to see what I'm building? The foundation had been poured 2 weeks ago. The framing would start next month. James had designed every detail himself, working late into the night, creating something his children might one day love. It's just dirt and concrete, Emma said. For now, but it'll be a house, your house when you visit. I'm building a tree house in that oak over there. And see that clearing? That's going to be a workshop. I thought maybe you could help me build things. Birdhouses maybe, or furniture for your rooms. Jake's eyes lit up slightly. You're going to let us use tools? I'm going to teach you to use tools, the way my grandfather taught me. James pulled out his phone and showed them a picture. This is your great-grandfather, Ethan. He died a few months ago. He built a ranch from nothing, raised a family through impossible odds. And before he died, he told me the most important thing. What? Emma asked despite herself. That legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build while you're here. James knelt to their level. I messed up. I worked too much and forgot what mattered. But I'm trying to fix it. This land, this house, it's not just for me. It's for you, a place where you always belong. Mom says you're trying to buy us, Jake said. Your mom's not wrong to be suspicious. But I'm not trying to buy you. I'm trying to show you who I am and who I want to be. James stood. Come on, let me show you where your bedrooms will be. They walked the land. James showed them the plans, pointed out where the vegetable garden would go, where they could put a swing set, where the workshop would be built. Slowly, their skepticism began to crack. Can we really help build stuff? Emma asked. Every Saturday, if you want. I want to, she said quietly. Me too, Jake admitted. Sarah watched from her car, arms crossed. She didn't trust this. James didn't blame her. But when he walked the children back at the end of the visit, she looked at him differently. Not with forgiveness, but maybe with the possibility of it. Same time next week, James asked. Same time? Sarah agreed. That night, James sat in his apartment and wrote in a notebook. He was documenting everything his father had told him. The story of Ethan and Clara, of Thomas finding a family, of fighting corruption and near death and building something that lasted. He would write it all down, and someday when Jake and Emma were old enough, he would tell them, would pass down the legacy his father had given him. A man builds, a man teaches, a man leaves something worth more than gold. The notebook filled slowly, page after page, the story of a mail-order bride and a desperate rancher, of a boy saved from an orphan's fate, of a baby born into chaos and love. And at the end, James wrote his own chapter, about a man who lost his way but found it again, who learned that legacy isn't inherited, it's earned. 5 years later, Jake was 15 and Emma was 13. The house on the 50 acres was finished. James had full custody now, shared equally with Sarah. The children spent half their time with each parent, but they considered both places home. On a Saturday in spring, James and Jake were in the workshop building a bookshelf for Emma's room. The radio played softly. Sawdust covered the floor. Jake was measuring lumber while James cut, both of them working with the easy rhythm of people who had done this together dozens of times. Dad, Jake said, tell me again about great-grandpa Ethan. James smiled. Which part? The blizzard, when he almost died saving Grace. So James told it. The story he had told so many times he could see it as clearly as if he'd been there. The storm, the desperate search, Clara coming out tied to a rope, Ethan nearly freezing. And he did it for a horse, Jake asked. He did it because he made a promise. To Thomas. That's what men do. They keep their promises even when it's hard. Jake nodded, absorbing this. Is that why you built this house, to keep a promise? To make a promise, to show you and your sister that you matter more than anything. James set down his saw. Your great-great-grandfather Ethan taught me something important. Family isn't just who you're born to, it's who you choose, who chooses you back. He chose Thomas, I chose you and Emma, and I hope someday you'll choose to pass these lessons to your own children. I will, Jake promised. Emma came running in, her face flushed with excitement. Dad, look what I found in the attic. She held up an old photograph, black and white, faded at the edges. It showed a man and woman standing in front of a cabin. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that looked directly at the camera. The woman beside him was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with delicacy. She looked strong, capable. Her hand rested on the shoulder of a boy standing in front of them, and in her arms she held a baby. Is that them? Emma asked. Ethan and Clara. James took the photograph carefully. He had seen it before in his father's belongings after he died. But seeing it here in the house he had built, with his own hands passed down to his children, it felt different. That's them. 1885, right after Rose was born, and that's Thomas, the boy they took in. They look happy, Emma said. They fought hard for that happiness. James set the photo on the workbench where they could all see it. And because they did, because they built something that lasted, we're here. In this house, building this bookshelf, living the life they made possible. Jake picked up his measuring tape again. Then we better make this bookshelf really good. To honor them. To honor them, James agreed. They worked until dark, 3 generations of Blackwood legacy flowing through their hands. Building, teaching, loving. Outside Montana spread vast and eternal under stars that had witnessed Ethan's struggles and triumphs. The same stars that had seen a desperate man place an advertisement for a wife. That had watched a woman step off a stage into the unknown. That had illuminated a blizzard where love was forged in ice and terror. The land remembered. The mountains kept their vigil. And in houses scattered across the territory that Ethan and Clara had called home, their descendants lived and built and taught, passing down the only legacy that mattered. Not land, not money, not even blood, but the simple, profound truth that a life well lived is measured not in what you take, but in what you leave behind for those who come after. In his hospital bed months before Ethan Blackwood had closed his eyes for the last time, surrounded by family, knowing his work was done, he had built, he had taught, he had left something worth more than gold. And in workshops and kitchens and around dinner tables, his great-grandchildren learned his lessons still, would pass them to their own children, would keep the legacy alive, not through memory, but through action. That was the point. That was always the point. A man who builds something bigger than himself never truly dies. He lives on in every foundation he laid, every lesson he taught, every choice he made that rippled forward through time. Ethan Blackwood, once a desperate rancher with nothing but debt and determination, had become eternal. Not because of what he owned, but because of what he gave. James closed the notebook that contained his father's story. Tomorrow he would add another page. About today, about Jake and Emma and the bookshelf, about carrying forward the work that Ethan had started one cold October day in 1884 when he decided to reach for hope instead of surrender. The story wasn't over. It would never be over. As long as someone remembered, as long as someone carried the lessons forward, Ethan and Clara lived. In every nail driven true, in every promise kept, in every child taught that family is made, not found, in every man who chose to build instead of break. The legacy continued. The circle remained unbroken. And somewhere in the Montana night, if you listened carefully, you could hear the whisper of an old rancher's voice. Build something worth keeping. Teach someone worth teaching. Love someone worth loving. That's all. That's everything. That's the legacy that never dies.